everyone. This is Joe Riggio. Welcome to episode 27 of Socially Joe, where we interview business owners and we get to know a little bit more about them. So today I have as my guest MARIBETH DITMARS, and I would like to introduce MARIBETH right now. So Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself as a brief overview before we go into the questions.
Well, again, I'm MARIBETH DITMARS. I am an author, a speaker, and a blogger. I have published 3 books, and I love using my written materials and my speaking to help people.
Awesome. That's great. So let's go into the questions now. So I know we had met through a connection point through networking, which is great. But as we were talking, you told me that you're a writer. So what made you decide to become a writer?
Well, back in 1997, my 10-year-old son, Christopher, was diagnosed with leukemia, and our entire world was turned upside down. So I started a journal, and mostly the journal started to keep track of the names of doctors and medicines and, what his protocol was and so forth. But eventually that journal developed into a heart-wrenching narrative as my family struggled and my son bravely fought his terminal illness. And that became my first book, Christopher's Journey. After a while, I wrote another book for children with cancer. That became my second book, The Bald-Headed Princess, which is a middle reader chapter book to help families dealing with pediatric cancer. And then, unfortunately, 5 years ago in 2015, our 21-year-old son was killed in an accident. So I became a 2-time mother who lost a child. So I lived every parent's nightmare twice. And that birthed my most recent book, which is called Dancing in the Minefields: One Woman's Faith Journey Through Child Loss, Addiction, and Adversity.
Nice. Okay. So that's a lot of material to actually go into, and they say that your environment inspires you, but that's not the type of environment that anyone wants to be inspired by. But at least it gave you an outlet to, write about these experiences. Tell us about the books that you have published thus far.
Well, those are the 3 I just mentioned. The first was a self-published memoir, Christopher's Journey, about my son. The second one was traditionally published. That was my children's book. That's The Bald-Headed Princess, and that was published by Imagination Press, which is an imprint of the American Psychological Association. And then my last book is self-published. So I've had the experience of doing traditionally published as well as self-published.
Awesome. Okay. So I know you mentioned the books that you have thus far, but are there any more books in the works for upcoming for us to read?
Yes, absolutely. I have several in the works. They're all children's books, and they all have humor, and I love to draw and illustrate. So I'm going to be illustrating these children's books. One is set in the classroom because I have I worked many years as a teacher. As a matter of fact, I still do a little bit of teaching. Right now, though, I'm focusing on my speaking opportunities because I want to use my life experiences to help people. So I've done some virtual events. With the COVID, everything has changed suddenly. But yes, I'm hoping I live a really long time to get everything done.
Nice. Well, yeah, this whole COVID thing has thrown everyone off, and hopefully it doesn't impact you as much. But how did your writing lead to speaking opportunities as well? Because I know you mentioned that you taught and you were doing some speaking.
Well, with my first book, I did a lot of speaking at fundraisers for childhood cancer. And what I would do is I would donate a portion of the proceeds to the cause. I spoke for some well-known national cancer nonprofits, and it just was a wonderful experience being able to use my writing to make a difference. And then as I, worked through the material in my most recent book, which is faith-based, I have actually begun speaking at churches and organizations that maybe have people who are struggling with grief and child loss. I also have a portion of that book that's dedicated to my experience with addiction. So I've done a lot of speaking in that avenue. I've spoken at recovery workshops. So I think, when you publish a book, you have to look at the whole package. It's not just something that somebody buys and sits down and reads. It's a chance to connect with people and to make a difference in their lives.
Yeah, I definitely believe that in a whole aspect of ways, because when you start to hear what other people might have experienced or seen, it gives a little bit more credibility as you're talking about it. But we understand that you have been traditionally published as a self-published author, but what are some of the pros and cons of being self-published?
Well, with self-publishing, you have more control. You can determine the price point. You can work with companies like Amazon as to when you release the book, how it's released. With traditionally published, the publishing house has more control, and they also keep a higher percentage of the proceeds. My income stream with my self-published books actually has a much higher potential. And what's interesting nowadays is self-publishing at one time was kind of frowned upon because there were a lot of vanity presses, and the thought was, oh, well, I couldn't get a publisher, so I'm just going to pay someone to print it. And that market has completely changed. And there's now a lot of well-known authors who have started out being traditionally published and have switched to self-publish because they have greater control.
Awesome. Okay. So because of the experiences with grief and addiction, you speak often on those topics. What is your main message or messages when you speak to those with your audience?
Well, with addiction, the most important message is you can't do it alone. With the grief, my tagline is laughter and tears are only a moment apart, but joy is eternal. So basically, I'm in the business of hope. That's my promise to my subscribers on my blog and my email. I can't promise them a perfect life. I can't promise them that reading my books will make them walk away from their addiction or their grief forever. But what I do is I offer them a different way of looking at the trauma in their life, looking at it through a more eternal and spiritual perspective.
Okay. I love how you said the tears and all that come in moments, seconds apart, because and I'm kind of speaking from the heart here, is sometimes it's hard for me to show like tears and emotion at like the death of a family member, but man, when it comes, it comes. And have you seen that? Have you seen that with some of the speaking events or anything where people have come to you and said that they've had some like type of things that they're still trying to work out, but they're not emotionally able to get there?
Yes. And I've also had people come up to me afterwards wanting to share their story with me because they feel connected and they've met someone who understands. I think this is especially hard for men too. You know, we women tend to be more demonstrative, but it's absolutely an incredible connection when I can help someone get in touch with these emotions.
Well, that's good because, some of us need some help. um, but what are some of the things that have helped you grow and your audience as a writer and a blogger?
Well, I have used, I've learned, I'm a student of marketing as I speak. I am learning internet tools to schedule my posts. This year, I joined Instagram. I'm a grandmom, and I was always a Facebook, Twitter gal, and LinkedIn. And my grandkids are all like, Grammy, you got to get on Instagram. And I found out that that can be a great visual tool for promoting my blogs and my books. So one thing, and I'm also taking some courses from some people who have been more successful. There's a lot of people out there who have done this right, and they've done it better than I have. So I continue to be a student, but if anyone out there is thinking of promoting a book or a blog, you definitely have to master these online tools and get comfortable using them and linking them together.
So I'm going to ask you to dive in a little bit deeper because we know that you're a writer, we know that you're a speaker, but obviously now we're knowing that you're a blogger. So when did the blogging start, and how has that helped translate into these different mediums for you?
Well, the blogging started after we lost our second son. Jared was 21 years old and died suddenly, and his death for us was even more traumatic than the death of our Chris, because Chris knew he was sick, Chris knew he was dying. We had closure, and I had written my book about Chris, but Jared was snatched from us suddenly, which is a different grief experience. So that's what started my blog. And I have to say, the first person I helped was myself because it was a form of therapeutic journaling. But then as I developed my blog and got a little more clarity of message, such as helping people with loss and addiction, I realized that I had another book in me. So that blog actually led to my most recent book, Dancing in the Minefields. So the blog does that. It helped me create more content, and it also keeps me more connected with my readers, because my average blog length is probably only 800 or 900 words, and somebody who's not a book reader can click on my blog and read something in a few minutes that gives them a message, and they don't have to sit down and read a whole book. And I highly recommend blogging for anyone who likes to write, but they're not sure if they're at the point where they want to write a whole book. And also, when you have a blog, your audience can leave comments, which they can't do with a book. So that's a great way to connect as well.
I agree with blogging because it's a little bit easier, but how often do you blog, to tell you the truth? Because do you blog like 3 times a month, once a week, twice a week?
Right now, I'm blogging twice a month because I am so busy with other endeavors. Ideally, I would love to blog weekly, but I haven't been able to do that. So when my people subscribe to my